I was doing some research, and when I Googled your name, Tyler Funk, there's actually another Tyler Funk who is a influencer, online personality. I just wanted to know if you knew about that or if that came up
Yeah,
at
yeah,
all
yeah, yeah, yeah.
in
No,
this
no, no.
production.
So there's actually a few. It's funny. There's another Tyler Funk who's a filmmaker and a documentary filmmaker in Winnipeg. He's
Okay.
mainly a cinematographer, and so him and I have been confused before. Like I've gotten work emails for him, and then there's this other Tyler Funk who's an influencer online as like I think he does like parkour stuff or like I'm not even sure what it is. Um,
This could have been a movie full of Tyler Funks and their
yeah,
and
yeah.
their
Apparently,
influence on the internet.
yeah. Like apparently, I need a new name. I guess like a really common name. I always thought it was rare growing up.
That's
Um,
funny. I mean, I thought it was rare too. I try to keep that in mind when I'm Googling just to make sure I'm looking up the right person and the right information. But yeah, kind of a fun fact we're talking about online
yeah,
personalities, and there's a few. So hopefully you become one of the more prominent ones.
yeah.
Um,
The battle for the first Google search goes
exactly.
on, you know?
Marketing. I mean, I know all about that. So anyway, we're here to talk about your movie, Anything for Fame. And for those who are just discovering the film, can you give a quick synopsis on what the movie is about?
For sure. So anything for fame is really kind of, I think the title really sums up pretty good. It's those creators looking to do anything to get attention. And it gets a little deeper onto like who those creators are, why they're doing what they do. You know, I think of social media so often as that metaphor of everyone stopping to stare at the car crash. You know, and this takes a little bit of a deeper look of these are people who intentionally made those car crashes happen.
Mm.
Who are they inside those cars?
I think that's such an interesting approach because the subjects that you end up featuring in the documentary all have very fascinating backgrounds and very fascinating things that they do to entertain the internet. And I thought a lot about that, where like one of them mentioned like AFV, right? And that's funny, and I enjoy that, but it's also accidental. Whereas at least in most of those cases, and in the case of internet fame, there's a lot of intentionality put into what these content creators are doing and why they're doing it. Um, and it's interesting. So I usually end my interviews on this question, but I think it's such an interesting thing to start talking about. But what do you want people to take away from this movie about influencers doing wild things for fame?
Yeah, I think the big thing is empathy, honestly. And I'm not sure if that's like going to get people excited to watch the film. But I think it is the answer in the way of like, I think a lot of these influencers, as we got to know them deeper, you understand a little bit of like, they're kind of just playing a game, right? And I think it's very easy as, especially, I'm 35, we're like, kind of like, you young dumb kids are doing such crazy stuff these days. Like every old generation loves to be like, the young kids are doing the craziest stuff ever. Um, and I think there's a line in the film where Ava says, like we were so lucky to grow up without the internet.
Mhm.
Um, and now you have a generation of creators of like that's their playground. That's where they're growing up. That's why they're learning to make mistakes. But the stage is in front of millions. And the goal is to make that mistake, which is so bizarre. And so I think my goal is through viewers watching this, they have a little more empathy for creators and hopefully help to steer that conversation as creators of, us as viewers can play a big role in that. Like if the only content people are willing to pay for online is OnlyFans, that's
Mhm.
the work we're going to create for creators,
Mhm.
and this appetite for free content is problematic as viewers, right? Where it forces this young generation of creators to do the most risky thing just to get eyeballs.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think empathy is what I hope people get. I'm be curious to know what your reaction was after the film.
Yeah, no, honestly, this movie covers so many angles about the creator experience. Obviously, you talk directly with the creators and having them give their experiences, but also you talk their parents make appearance in the films to give their perspectives. And there's also some other stories about other people who are affiliated with these creators. And it is so comprehensive, and I think that is the level of dimension that we don't get scrolling through TikTok, right? Or scrolling through reels or whatever. We don't get that level of depth, and I think that this movie really does help add that context to how we perceive the internet. But it does make me wonder more about our engagement with the internet. There's a line that comes up in the film. It says we need to remember that we are actually in charge of the platform. It isn't the platform in charge of us. And that line was said, and I had to think, is that true? Is that something that is actually the case, or does the internet have such a stronghold on our attention that maybe we don't have as much control as we think we do? I don't know. In the way, like after making this documentary, what do you think about that?
I think the control is there if you want to take it. If
Mhm.
you choose to be selective of who you're following, if you choose to fact check your sources, if you choose to really put the work in, you are in control. But I think the majority of us aren't willing to do that work. And that's where maybe we're not. Like if we're
Mhm.
just showing up saying, hey, entertain me today. I want to see what's crazy out there, or I want to get caught up in the most controversial, and have an opinion without any facts around it. The internet will
Mhm.
provide that to you very
Right.
quickly. The internet loves doing that. Uh, and so, yeah, I think it's an interesting time of we have more freedom than ever before. We really do. We're not stuck with just a few different news channels,
Mhm.
and there's a huge danger with that too. Of suddenly you can be very lost in your own bubble. Um, so yeah, I think it's there for the taking more than ever before. I really do. I love the internet. It's changed my life. I met so many amazing people because of it. Even us having this conversation, right?
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, absolutely.
like it's such a gift, and how we even got through the pandemic with Zoom, and like these are all tools of communication that do make us stronger. Um, but if you really just show up and put the bare minimum effort in as a viewer, I think that's where you're going to end up. It's going to have a lot of control over what you see.
I really do hope that people obviously earn that empathy for content creators, but also really take a step back and look at their own behaviors with engaging with the internet. I think that that is one of the things that I hope people take away from this. But from the perspective of content creators, I'm sure because as the movie indicates, and as we all know, lots of people aspire to be content creators. Um, and it's such an alluring thing because, like you're saying, that it's so accessible now. But what I realized in the movie is that there is this level of maturity that happens with your subjects. You start by kind of getting the genesis of what they do and how they do it, the development of the attraction and the growing followership. But then there's an interesting moment where a number of your subjects come to these like realizations in their content creating at this stage in their content creating life. And so talk to me about the role that maturity plays in this industry of content creation.
For sure. And, I think there's a few factors that play into that. One is structurally, we really want the film to be like a feed where it's, it's
Mhm.
fast paced, you see stuff. And then you kind of get into the comments, and then you follow them longer and you get a little bit more detail of who they are. And then you start to understand a little bit more as you follow deeper and deeper. And so that was the journey we want to take
Yeah.
viewers on. And then on the other side is these are all, of course, real people, and they're in their early 20s and they're changing at such a rapid pace. And so by filming over the course of a year, and I started conversations with some of these creators, a year or two even before we started filming, um, that they're going through such a transformative period in life, and I think a lot of them, hit that kind of thing of the million views or the million likes or international news, and then started to realize that the bag of gold isn't there. It's, like it's very much, you always hear the story of the top 10 creators that are making all this
Mhm.
money. And I always think of it as like, if we talked every time someone touched a basketball, we said like, hey, you're going to be LeBron James, you're set for life.
Mhm.
All you got to do is just, get one hoop in there. And like that's not how sports work. And people are very aware that sports is this insane process to try and get to that elite leagues. And content creation is even harder because there's not a timeline. There's not a draft every year. There's not a funnel that says you're going to make it or you're not, right?
Right.
And that's what I think makes it very alluring, and also makes it just such a hard game to actually get to that tier where you even make above minimum wage on
Mhm.
your content.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because there's some of your subjects speak to that where there's some who leverage things like OnlyFans to make a lot of money, but then there's some who are just like using the traditional platforms, TikTok, Reels, or whatever, and just have not found that financial success. And so it's really a game of luck, which I don't think the average viewer takes that into account, and so that's interesting. I did want to know, compared to before and after you making this movie, where did going viral sit for you and yourself? Like, did making this movie make you more interested in becoming viral or less interested in becoming viral?
Yeah, great question. It's one I ask myself every day. I've been a creator, like I actually created one of the first animated, well, the first animated narrative series on Vine back in the day.
Oh, Vines, classic.
Yeah, classic, right? And that we had Paul Scheer in it from the League, and that that show blew up. We had like 30 million views on it. Then we
Right.
did about 200 episodes. That was one of my first like experiences in this creator space. But I never wanted the story to be me, because I've seen how dangerous and of a space that is,
Mm-hmm.
how much pressure it puts on you for very little reward. Where I think
Mm-hmm.
about the traditional, if you became a movie star in Hollywood, you have your publicists, you have your lawyers, you have a team around you protecting you and growing that brand. As a
Mm-hmm.
content creator, you're all on your own. And almost to stay relevant, you need to keep pushing that envelope. You got to break the unwritten rules, but then often you break it too far and you lose
Mm-hmm.
everything. Um, and that's where I'm like, I have no desire to put myself there. My Instagram is terrible. I don't even tell people to bother looking at it. It's like me, my wife, and my kids. It's stuff that makes me happy. It brings me joy.
Right.
And I probably should just delete it because I'm like, who even wants to see that besides my parents? And yeah, I really struggle with that because I do think even as filmmakers now, there's a pressure for everyone to be the famous version. You see it, the plastic surgeons are all over it. They need to be
Mm-hmm.
the plastic surgeon who does all the TikTok people. You get a lot of business that way. Um, I think of social media, it's just pure marketing. And if you're not directly selling something, which I'm not
Mm-hmm.
online, I think it's a waste of time. And I think a lot of platforms are going to encourage you to do it. But unless you really have like that funnel created, for most of us, I'm better spent off taking pitch meetings and, spending my energy there.
You know what? I have a whole segment of questions about filmmaking versus content creating, and I'll get to those in a moment. So I'm glad you brought that up, but we'll get back to that. In For now, I want to hear a little bit more about making this movie and the team that you worked with, and also working with the NFB. Just tell me about the process of making the film.
Of course. So the whole start of it really, I grew up in Banff, Alberta, which is like this tiny town in the Rocky Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up with a really small group of friends. And, we were really interested in this notion of being famous. This was back in the days of, say, like Jim Carrey and Will Smith
Mm-hmm.
dominated, right? It's like
Nice.
there were legit movie stars that had the space. And we grew up and we all decided we were going to go to Vancouver and make films together. And that was the plan from, I think it was grade 6. I'd written that all down. Like, going to
Mm-hmm.
Vancouver and make films. And sure enough, like 4 of us made it out here, went to film school out here in Vancouver. There's me, my editor and producer partner, Sebastian Mercado, who worked on the film with me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Connor, who's a writer who didn't end up working with us later. And then also another friend, Dave, who was an actor. And he would always do the most provocative stuff. He
Mm-hmm.
would do anything to get attention. And we were living together during film school. And during that period, he ended his life. He jumped over a bridge. And it
Jeez.
really, yeah. And it's one of those things we didn't realize how much of that behavior is red flags, even though I'd grown up with him since kindergarten, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And we knew he was always pushing the envelope. You never really know how much is a performance or how much is a cry for help.
Mm-hmm.
And so that obviously changed my life dramatically. Therapy, that was during film school, was like such a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still something I think and talk about very often. But that really led me, when I started seeing all these influencers doing this kind of stuff, to really wonder a bit more about who's going on. Are they okay? It's not just a spectacle. There's some
Mm-hmm.
other stuff, when you reject society so hard to break it, to make that, there's a lot of layers going on. So that's the genesis of the idea.
Yeah, and that I find that really fascinating because there is a segment in the movie kind of that addresses that very directly with Ava's friend Ethan and his fate because of the internet. Um yeah, maybe just really briefly touching on that story. Um what was that something that you always intended on wanting to be a part of this movie? Because there's like I said, a lot of angles here, but the story of Ethan is really kind of addresses what you're talking about when it comes to your friend David.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing where it's like we never set out really to cover that Ethan's story.
Hmm.
We started by interviewing 250 influencers, and we
Hmm.
were, asking ourselves this question all the time, though, about people's journey and how does it affect their mental health.
Hmm.
And then when we shot our first round of interviews with Ava, we realized that Ethan's story was a big part of hers. And we had no idea until we literally started shooting it. And there's a photo of Ethan still on her locked phone on her screen,
Hmm.
And she was in a very, I think, emotional state still in our first interview, and kind of said, hey, what's going on there? And that's when we realized that we needed to go get the full story and talk to his mom, and cover that in a lot more depth, and then it becomes a significant part of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And a very crucial part of the film as well. I think it's a very important story to include here because it does help give that angle of what being an influencer can do. And also, again, kind of talking about our own behavior as consumers of social media and the effect that we have on these people sometimes. So yeah, I thought that was very respectfully done and a really important part of the film. Um, yeah, so filmmaking versus content creating. There are interesting parallels. Obviously, filmmakers aren't, at least typically, doing extreme things to get attention for their films, but there's certainly a parallel between like content creators needing to appease their followers and sponsors, and filmmakers needing to appease their audience and financiers. So can you talk to me a little bit more about what you think about that parallel and maybe the compare contrast between your work as a filmmaker and content creators' work on the internet?
For sure. And it's a line that continues to blur and makes me nervous. And I think a lot of filmmakers should be very concerned too.
Mm-hmm.
I think, content creation, I think you have to kind of follow the money and like where the platforms, right? That's where the money is essentially coming from. TikTok, YouTube, Snapchat, and they're kind of thrift stores. They want all the content. They don't really care what the content is. They don't care the cost of the damage around it, what happens. They just want the content.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it's kind of on you to figure out how to monetize. They'll do, quarterly, they might do a creators fund where they spend down, but those are never, they change them all the time. We met lots of YouTubers too who are making good money, and then suddenly the algorithm changed and you lost everything. The gift, that we have as filmmakers is we sometimes get the opportunity to sell our film or get it funded ahead of time. So
Mm-hmm.
at least you have a little bit of independence. You don't have to chase every day and change your story.
Mm-hmm.
I was extremely lucky to be funded by the National Film Board and the TELUS Fund for this project. The amount of creative control that we got was, they pretty much gave us all the creative control we wanted. And because they were willing to do that while putting money up and really believe in us, gave us a level of freedom that I don't think content creators get. I think a lot of pretty much everyone we interviewed, even in the OnlyFans space, male and female, it wasn't their first choice of content to make.
Mm-hmm.
But if you follow the money, a lot of smart creators realize, well, this is the best way if I'm actually going to make money doing this. And then I can make my music or my comedy or my other stuff on the side.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to pay for it somehow. And I think that's the thing is like, there's such a pressure. We all need money to live. And as content creators, you can only give so much of your free time until you have to kind of start figuring out, well, how do I chase some form of income? And filmmakers, luckily, there's a little bit of structure there. It's changing dramatically. And I think a lot of filmmakers would say we're on a path where, who knows, right? After all the strikes, like where we end up.
Right,
But,
right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, and I laugh when you talk about the changing algorithm because as a marketer, I deal with that all the time. Think things in the marketing space change so frequently, and you always have to be on top of like what those changes mean for you and whatever you're trying to push. And so, yeah, that is a struggle. And yeah, like you're saying, with the landscape of filmmaking, also something to be very mindful about. Um, there is a very interesting level of vulnerability that comes up in this movie with these content creators. And the one moment in the film that really stood out to me was when you're having a conversation with Jake, who, is kind of the one who chases pain for fame, I think is how you put it. And he was reading comments in the comment section, and he was explaining how the negative comments that affect him most are the ones that kind of reinforce the insecurities he's already kind of that already kind of pre-exist for him. As a filmmaker, how do you relate with that notion, and also how do you deal with the vulnerability of putting your own work out to the public for consumption and potential scrutiny?
Yeah, I think the only healthy way to deal with it is just to get your next project going, and then you have something to talk about and you say, hey, I made that and I'm moving past it. When this film came out in Canada, originally on Paramount Plus, we got review bombed in the States on IMDb.
Oh
And
no.
we think we know because there's an influencer who we cut out of the film that we think they might have been a part of that.
That,
Uh,
you know, I never thought about that when you're working with influencers and how that can backfire, I suppose.
yeah, because we're still not released in the States, but
Right.
there was like, you know, something like 20 votes of 1 star or 0 star on IMDb. And we're like, that's interesting. Like, who bothered to track down this film, watch in Canada, go back to the States,
Hmm.
but there's a certain influencer who was very unhappy with it. And so, you know, it's when I think about that, I'm like upset. I'm like, man, I just want people to see this film. I want people to give it a shot. I
Right.
hate for people to see it, the review on IMDb and think less of it.
Hmm.
Um, Especially when it's, these are not from people who have watched the film.
Hmm.
But I'm like, well, it's not healthy for me to think about it. I'm not going to change that. I'm not going to spend my energy rallying around, being like, hey, everyone, vote 10. We're going to get him out there. I'm like, no, whatever. It is what it is. And I've got to get my next projects going. And that's each project will have its own journey.
Absolutely. That's a great answer. So I appreciate that a lot. I'm gonna wrap up here in a few minutes. Just a couple more
No,
questions.
no, no. Take as long.
Um,
It's awesome to talk to you, man.
this,
I'm honestly like so grateful that, like anyone who watches the film, like I'm honestly, it means a lot.
yeah, no, and I'm happy that I had the chance to see it. One of the things that I was thinking about with this film, and a lot of times when I watch documentaries, is how is this going to end? So, like among the many questions you can ask yourself approaching a project like this, one of those is like, why are these influencers willing to risk so much for fame? And I was wondering if, in the process of this film and making this documentary, did you find? I know you found answers, but did you find satisfying answers to that question in the process of making this movie?
Yeah, I think the most satisfying answer we got was from Rockwell. As you kind of mentioned, that we all crave fame and we all crave being relevant. And I
Mm-hmm.
think fame can mean a lot of different things for us. It can be, I'm a parent of 2 young children, and it can be being like the dad who's the coach of the basketball team. It could be being, the person who runs the pack at the local community school. Like we all find different ways of having our, fame or relevance within our communities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really human. And I think it's important that we realize we all have that desire. And then we can start to address, well, how much is this desire taking control of my actions? And how much am I letting that take control over these other decisions? And does it actually really matter?
Right.
So I think that's the best one. Like, I think fame is, it's not in the film, but we talked about it, in one of our interviews, how it's a bit like a currency, right? Like when you get it, you get certain
Mm-hmm.
access with it, right? It can give you different opportunities. Even the fact that I got to have this conversation with you, right? I have
Mm-hmm.
like mini fame of making the film, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like I wouldn't get to have that conversation if I didn't have that, right? And so there's a
Mm-hmm.
currency with fame, but it expires quickly. It can empty your bank account any day. It's very unreliable. It's kind of like Bitcoin, it's like up and down. You never know, or some altcoin, like you just
Right.
it's such a weird thing to bet your identity on and your
Right.
ego on. And I think that's an important thing, that people understand fame. Like now that there is this desire to be a content creator, I really think people should be asking, well, do I want to be a face, an expert in my community on, whatever my YouTube channel is about? Or is it about, do I need stronger relationships in my inner circle? And maybe that'll fill that desire. Maybe I just need to spend more time with building my friend group and finding my community. Because I think we're all, obviously coming out of this pandemic and being
Mm-hmm.
isolated and still trying to figure out how that shaped us.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Great answer as well. Like honestly, this is a conversation that I could probably have for like a long time. And I appreciate again you taking this time to chat with me about it. I will close with one last question, and that is, what is your preferred social media for entertainment?
It's TikTok. Honestly, I find TikTok is just like the algorithm's insane. I often will create different accounts because you can get a rabbit hole, right? So you delete, go to a new account. When we researched this film, we did that all the time
Yeah.
because we, especially when we were getting into like individual genres, we really wanted to just, if you let a few videos go, you're down that rabbit hole.
Hmm.
I think TikTok's amazing. I think TikTok, when you look at the information rate, if you're watching comedy, you're seeing the best jokes on earth crowdsourced from hundreds of millions of people. How can you compete with that from a Netflix sitcom? Like the information rate, it's like this is the best stuff on planet Earth. There's amazing voices out there. And no matter what, if you want comedy, if you want political news, whatever it is, you're going to find so many of these things. Um, and that's why it's a great treat. But I also try and limit the time because I can, like I said, those bubbles, it can really throw you down those rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Um,
I've
yeah,
had I've had to move my TikTok icon somewhere else
yeah,
into a folder, something that takes extra clicks to get to. It is.
Where do you spend your time usually?
Oh, great question. Actually, it is between, I've learned to go between TikTok and Reels.
Okay,
Um, I think that the algorithms for each have picked up different interests of mine. And
nice.
so when I get tired of TikTok, then I can just pop over to Reels, and then it has a whole different set of content that TikTok hasn't quite picked up on yet. And you know what? I think I prefer it that way. Um, it's nice to have a little bit of diversity in where I spend my time on my phone, but I'm also learning to kind of like you be responsible with my time and consumption, and find the right times to do it, because I don't think that it's evil, right? I don't think that it's an inappropriate time to an inappropriate way to spend your time. It's just about restraint. that's
Yeah, like I
that's what I've
love all
learned.
these, like like YouTube, I think is such a gift, like the amount of knowledge out there that we have access to, right? Where I think
Yeah.
of it like it's this amazing visual library when you need to fix anything. Like it's such a gifted time to be a part of,
Mm-hmm.
but also hard to like manage it responsibly. And that I think will be a continued challenge.
Absolutely, for sure. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for this conversation. This is great, and congratulations again on the film. I'm happy that it's getting a push right now, and I really hope that more people get the chance to see it and counteract those IMDb ratings that probably I think don't belong there. But that's just my opinion. So,
Awesome. Well, Thomas, thank you so much. And yeah, honestly, if you're ever in Vancouver, hit me up, coffee, beer, donuts, whatever. I'm sure there's, again, you probably got a few hours worth of content stuff and internet tech that I'm sure we could jam on.
I'm sure we could. Thanks, man.